This image is 2 seconds away from disaster. And, for a country that allegedly did not have any cards a few months ago, Ukraine sure appears flush with them now. Earlier this week, it was Operation Spiderweb, and the destruction of a whole bunch of pricey Russian bombers, somehow using shipping containers as half aircraft carriers and as half modern-day Trojan horses. Today it is the Crimean Bridge. What is old is new again, as this marks the third time that Ukraine has struck it. Ukraine's security service announced what happened on Telegram. The operation lasted several months. SBU agents mined the supports of this illegal facility. And today, without any casualties among the civilian population, at 4:44 in the morning, the first explosive device was activated. The underwater supports were severely damaged at the bottom level. 1,100 kilograms of TNT equivalent explosives contributed to this. In fact, the bridge is in an emergency state. We can take a quick look at the video they released along with the Telegram post. Remember, no one was hurt in this, but you can clearly see that something happened underwater. Now, the bridge has not fallen. Ukraine also released this image of people surveying the damage, perhaps those who were driving along the road when it happened. But what I want to talk about today is the consequences of the attack, because the significance of striking this piece of infrastructure has changed over time. As a starting point, let's situate ourselves geographically. The Crimean Bridge, also known as the Kerch Bridge, shockingly spans the Kerch Strait and connects the Crimean Peninsula to Russia. It is a critical piece of infrastructure. When Putin signed the Federation paperwork to annex Crimea in 2014, there was no road connection between the two. Only a basic ferry system could shuttle things back and forth. Meanwhile, Ukraine had dammed the North Crimean Canal to prevent water from reaching the peninsula, thereby killing its agricultural industry. Thus, Crimea was in desperate need of resources, and the ferry system was insufficient for those purposes. In turn, construction on the bridge began in February 2016. The road bridge was completed in April 2018. Its opening was a big celebration, with Putin leading the first caravan down the bridge and turning it into a symbol of unity between the peninsula and the mainland. Well, if we go back to the image that Ukraine released, take a look here to get our bearings. It appears that Ukraine targeted some of the support pillars across the bridge's main archway. It is a sensible location given the wide gap that is necessary for ships to pass underneath it. Like I said though, the bridge has not collapsed. But if previous attacks are any indication, Russia will have to at least temporarily close parts of the bridge to examine the damage and see if there are any long-term concerns about its structural integrity. Based on this image, at least half of the vehicle bridge would need some scrutiny. The bridge itself is actually 2 bridges, and it is possible that the rail bridge was not affected by the attack. Anyway, for the moment, this is not a situation like the October 2022 detonation that dropped one of its roads into the strait, and thus gave us this utterly bizarre commemorative stamp. Indeed, that required months to fix. This is video from Putin surveying the repaired vehicle bridge. You can still see the damage done to the rail bridge due to a train catching fire as a result of the initial explosion. The interim period was a mess, with the vehicle bridge reduced to one-way alternating traffic. Trucks had to wait in line for days to cross into the peninsula. Pity the guy who had to service this. We will have to wait and see whether that will be the case again, not because part of the bridge is missing, but because authorities may worry that the weight from vehicles crossing over could cause the damaged supports to fully buckle. Some traffic appeared to be flowing a few hours after the attack, which is evidence not only that there are some very brave Russians out there, but also that the situation is not catastrophic. Still, it is worth discussing the military and political implications of the attack. As a point of comparison, a couple of years ago, the bridge was a vital piece of logistical infrastructure for Russia. Actually, go back to October 2022, and Russia was still occupying Kherson City. Ukrainian forces were applying constant pressure, though, and things were getting precarious for the Russian soldiers there. Well, the fastest way for Russia to resupply goods to the area was to use the bridge, drive through Crimea, pass through a little bit of Kherson Oblast, then cross the Dnipro River and into Kherson City. Consequently, the Titanic attack in October 2022 was an important part of Ukraine's siege that ultimately led to Russia retreating on November 11th. For the following 9 months, the bridge remained a key part of the defense of Russia's holdings surrounding the Sea of Azov. The widely anticipated plan that Ukraine had for its next offensive was to drive southeast from the hook in the Dnipro River. If successful, that would have cut Russian forces in half. Had Ukraine kept the Crimean Bridge disabled, that would have effectively left the southern Russian forces on an island, with the Dnipro River, Black Sea, the Sea of Azov, and Ukrainian troops leaving Russia with no quarter. After that, Ukraine could have attrited Russian materiel along the de facto island until maintaining control over the territory was no longer feasible. That would have struck both a major military and political blow to Russia's war effort. Maybe they would have even gone into Crimea. That is not what happened, of course. Ukraine's 2023 offensive only made a small dent in Russia's line. In the time since, Russia has focused its operations along the northern half of the line of control. It turns out that trying to stage a river crossing is much more difficult than the alternative. As a result, the Crimean Bridge is no longer the key piece of military infrastructure it once was. It is much easier for Russian troops to be resupplied from Rostov-on-Don than doing some sort of bizarre loop through Crimea. That is not to say that the bridge is meaningless. Russia still has to keep the left side of the Dnipro River defended from Ukrainian attacks. It is just no longer militarily pivotal. Nevertheless, attacking the Crimean Bridge still imposes significant political problems for Russia. Remember the damned North Crimean Canal from earlier? One of the first things that Russia did during the 2022 invasion was to undam it. Well, this part up here is key, or was key, to the whole thing. It is, or again, was, the Kakhovka Dam. Right as Ukraine's 2023 offensive got underway, it was destroyed. Intelligence officials widely believed that Russia was responsible. The flooding downstream made it more difficult for Ukraine to cross the river, thereby allowing Russia to redeploy some of its forces to the north to better defend where the attack was happening. The trade-off was that all of this water that was previously behind the Kakhovka Dam also provided the reservoir for the North Crimean Canal to operate. Thus, Crimea is back to a situation where its agricultural industry is a mess, and it requires significant support from Russia to sustain itself. The upshot for Russia is that the logistics of resupplying the peninsula are not as bad as they once were. The land corridor going around the Sea of Azov is under relatively safe control. So even if the bridge does need to close due to this attack or another one in the future, the extra cost is an inconvenient and somewhat more dangerous drive, but not something that is completely game-breaking. In any case, to get back to the cards analogy from earlier, what we are starting to see is a re-evaluation of the power to hurt that Ukraine has over Russia. The public's focus over the last year or so has been on Russia's slow and plodding offensive in the Donbass, which has seen a small but notable evolution in the front line. And maybe it is the case that the expected outcome of the war looks like this. If you disagree, that is fine, but let's all assume that it is here for a moment, because I want to make a more general theoretical point. Remember, my job is not actually to estimate these things. It is to tell you how changing expectations regarding the lines affects outcomes. Well, an expected outcome is not the only thing that matters for negotiating an end to the war, as the United States seems to be insisting on for the moment. It is also a calculation of what Russia will lose in the meantime. You see, even if Russia can get to here, the Kremlin may wager that it is not worth the hassle if it internalizes the costs of war in a land equivalency between the white and red lines. Now, the costs of war that we tend to focus on are the loss of life inside of the trenches. And even if you do not think that the Kremlin cares about that, remember that they have to pay to recruit individuals to join the war, they have to pay death benefits, and they have to pay to replace those forces. Because Russia has switched to recruiting soldiers through voluntary contracts, paying them a market rate, the real burden of the war has fallen instead to those having to foot the bill, which tend to be the oligarch class. An attack like what we saw today on the Crimean Bridge expands the cost to a wider group of citizens inside of Russia. And Operation Spiderweb's earlier attack on Russia's bombing fleet also expands the cost of the war to anyone who cares about deterring NATO in the future. The end sum of this is that Ukraine is trying to signal that Russia's costs of war are perhaps much larger than the Kremlin thought was the case just a couple of weeks ago. And that might make Russia just a bit more pliable the next time that the two parties sit down to negotiate. And the thing is, even if this attack does not go very far, watch it happening again a few times. There is a good chance that Ukraine was using a kamikaze submarine drone. We also talked yesterday on Lines on Maps Extra about using submarines as motherships for drones instead of shipping containers. The point is that defending this bridge is going to be a mess in the future. Of course, ceasefire negotiations went effectively nowhere yesterday, meaning Operation Spiderweb did not have a tangible effect on the Kremlin's bargaining position. Thus, it is possible that the Kremlin just views this as the cost of doing business. Or, alternatively, we will have to see Ukraine commit a whole bunch more of these before the Kremlin becomes convinced that Ukraine has the capacity. Or the cards, who knows. It is notable that Operation Spiderweb was not reported on in the Russian news all that much, as if the Kremlin did not want to raise red flags among the population. The bridge being something that average Russians use, this will be harder to hide. So maybe something might happen as a consequence. And to circle back to the beginning, one final note for the Trump administration. It turns out that Ukraine had at least 2 cards. One wonders how many more tricks Ukraine would have up its sleeve if given a full deck. But that is also a message for Europe, which is perfectly capable of increasing aid to Ukraine regardless of what may be going on inside the mind of one Donald Trump. If you want to learn more about the war, I have 2 excellent books describing its causes and its progress over the first couple of phases. Check the video description for more information about them. And if you enjoyed today's video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.